Coming up on this week's show, Sega is opening new physical shops.
An amazing new shooter for the Vectrex.
And we're joined by game designer and author Stuart Maine.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our sponsor, our friends at Bitmap Books. Now, today we're going to be talking all about their amazing new book that lands this month. You can get it from the 21st of May, called Hurt Me Plenty, The Ultimate Guide to First-Person Shooters. Now, this is the follow-up to their last book, I'm Too Young to Die, and this details the years 2003 to 2010, covering some absolute blockbusters when that genre went into the big-budget games, Call of Duty, Doom 3, Half-Life 2, and lots more as well. You'll hear more about that later on this week's show, but you can check it out in the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 479, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the show, the podcast that comes out every single Friday and of course brings you up to speed on all the big happenings in the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology from over the last 7 days, and brings you veterans of the industry onto the show for an interview in the second half. And I hope you boys had a good week. I must admit, I've been going really old school this week. Actually been playing around with my Mega 65. Now, this is actually a system that I picked up recently. We did do an entire episode on the Mega 65 a couple of years ago now, didn't we? But we had the guys on from Badger Punch Games last month, and they were telling us that they've made a new game for the Mega 65. That spurred me to go onto eBay and actually get my hands on one. So I've been really enjoying it as well. For people that don't know, it's kind of a modern day recreation of the unreleased Commodore 65 that would have been like a machine Commodore would have brought out back in the early 90s.
FPGA core, isn't it? So,
yeah.
You can add different cores on there. But interestingly, I've seen you've been connecting to a BBS, which is pretty amazing because, before the internet, there were BBSs and they were really important sources of information. And one of our listeners, Hags Lab on YouTube, has actually set up the BBS for us, it kind of works like an episode guide. What was it like? Because I saw that you went on it on the CRT monitor as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do BBS, you've got to do it on a CRT, old school style. And if you haven't seen the picture that I posted in our Discord, and you actually put it on our Facebook page as well, of me surfing, kind of surfing, I suppose, isn't it? The Retro Hour BBS using my Mega 65. I mean, God, that's so much fun. I've actually got a little, kind of a little black book where I've just been writing down all of these bulletin board addresses and my logins and everything for them as well. Signing up to a load of them, but I think, for me, you're probably the same, Ravi. Used to hear about BBSs when I was a kid. No way on earth would my parents have ever forked out, money for me to have a modem and stuff in my room to connect to them.
And I wasn't cool enough to, hack calling cards or do whatever they used to do back then. But, the podcast is connected up in a few ways as well. We've actually got an IRC channel on Libera chat as well, which is pretty awesome. And that's #Retro Hour, and you can connect to the Discord via that. So, we've got the kind of new school stuff like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but we've also got the old school connections, which I really love.
Yeah, so if you want to get involved in the Retro Hour BBS, like you said, it's basically just an episode guide at the moment and a bit about the podcast. But one really handy function on there is that you can search the episodes as well, which is pretty cool. And it currently runs in its Petsky graphics, because a few people have tried to get on using like PuTTY and like Mac clients, haven't they? But it actually uses Commodore Petsky graphics. So if you want to get on it, you'll have to either use an old school Commodore machine or something like Vice. The emulator should do it. But we're going to link that up from our website. You've got the address handy as well?
Yes, that's trhbbs.uk 6400.
Yeah, so TRH UK, and the port is 6400 as well if you want to get involved in the Retro Hour BBS. And a massive thank you to Hags Lab, who actually runs a really good YouTube channel, doesn't he, if you want to see more of that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll put that in the show notes as well. Now, this week, we're going to be talking more about, actually quite a range of subjects this week. Obviously, a big part of it is going to be talking about first-person shooters, which has been a bit of a vibe on this podcast over the last couple of months. But this week, we're going to be talking to Stuart Maine. Now, he's got a really interesting history. He's actually been a game designer for over 28 years, starting with working on games like Theme Hospital and Dungeon Keeper, where he basically got involved in QA testing for that. He actually managed to get a job by building Quake levels as his CV. And that landed him a job working at Psygnosis. And he worked on the sequel to G-Police when he was there. And then he worked on games like B-17 Flying Fortress. He also worked with the Oliver Twins, a lot of mobile games as well. But also he's been an author of some incredible books. Now he's done two of them with our sponsor Bitmap Books. The first one was called I'm Too Young to Die, which detailed kind of the golden age of the FPS game. Talking about stuff like, Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake. And the new one that actually lands next week, pre-orders are available now, called Hurt Me Plenty, which you might have heard me talking about in the intro to the podcast, and that covers the first-person shooter, kind of when it went AAA, talking about the years 2003 to 2010. So we were talking some massive games there, obviously. Doom 3, when that came along. I remember Doom 3 having a bit of a mixed reaction, though. Some people loved it. Some people thought it was a bit too much of a departure from the original games. What do you think?
That's weird, because of somebody at work today was asking me if they should get the new Doom. I can't remember the name right now. And they were like, you know what Doom was the best Doom? And I was like, which one? They were like, Doom 3 for the original Xbox. And I was like, you reckon? I was like, it is good, but it's just hard.
Really hard game. Very scary as well compared to the previous two. A lot of dark light and stuff in it as well. And obviously, you talk about that era, that's when, the first Call of Duty games started coming out. Still the peak for me, Call of Duty 4 in 2007 on the Xbox 360. Kind of the first game that I played regularly online. But also talking about games like Half-Life 2, some more quirky games that came along as well, like Firestarter and Moon. So it's a really interesting book, weighing in at 664 pages.
Oh, wow.
Wait. No, I got that wrong, sorry. Weighing in at 464 pages. So we're going to talk about his career in the industry, working at Psygnosis, and then get into these books as well and some history about legendary FPS games of Stuart Maine. He's coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. But if you are a regular listener, you'll know the way the first half of the podcast works. That's when we chat about what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last week. And this is quite timely, being that I did visit the Nintendo store in New York on my trip out there last month. Turns out that I love the headline on GameSpot. Sega does what Nintendo does. They're actually opening their first physical store.
I was surprised that there wasn't already a Sega store at some point. Like there was Sega World in the 90s. So I was like, I kind of assumed there would have been a Sega shop back in the day. But
I feel there was a merch store in there, wasn't it? Ravi went there.
What, in the Trocadero?
Yeah, Trocadero.
They must have had a merch store, yeah. I was too distracted by arcades at the time. But that was totally Sega branded. And I guess, with Sonic the movie out and everything, there's been quite a lot of Sega stuff out there and branding, but it's not been in one dedicated show. But this is because they've also got this new CEO, and he's basically saying, I want to make Sega really shine again. And, there's a lot about him kind of turning it into that aggressive 90s style Sega campaigns, and this is part of it as well. And I don't know if they had also in their arcades in Japan and stuff, like little merchandising bits or little outlets.
Yeah, I went to the Sega arcade in Tokyo, and I don't think they did. So there's definitely, that was in 2019. But yeah, there's definitely a gap there. And like you say, Nintendo have got 5 shops around the world. Sega plan on having 2 at the moment. So the first one's opened, which is already open, isn't it? In China.
In Shanghai.
Yeah, in Shanghai. And then they've got plans to open another one in Tokyo, in Shibuya. And when I first read this, I was like, oh, China, okay. I would have thought they'd start with Japan. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, there is one opening in Japan. But there's no plans at all for it hitting America or Europe at the moment. But hopefully they will if this is successful, because it looks cool. I'd probably spend a fortune in there just looking through the pictures, just at all the silly merchandise. But looking at the early pictures, it mostly looks like Sonic stuff. which kind of makes sense because it's early days, but there's absolutely loads of like, you name it. There's like chopsticks for Sonic on, magnets, plushies. There's a lot of Sonic plushies, but I'm hoping they put out a lot more IPs. I can see, if you look closely, I can see some Yakuza stuff and some Super Monkey Ball stuff, and some Puyo Puyo stuff, but I can't really see, I want to see some Alex Kidd. I want to see some proper classic stuff. I want to see some Altered Beast buried at the back there. Even if it's just some magnets or something, or some T-shirts, that'd be wicked.
Well, that's what these shops generally are. Because, a lot of people said to me when I was in New York, you've got to go to the Nintendo store. And don't get me wrong, it was cool. I did buy a T-shirt from there, which I was wearing yesterday, actually, with a Nintendo of New York kind of written around it. Looks very nice. But really, it was mainly merchandise. There were a few Switch games kind of in the corner, but it was 2 floors, the Nintendo store in New York. But yeah, it was mainly all plushies, T-shirts, posters. It was, that kind of thing, which it looks like this is as well. We'll link up the article on GameSpot if you want to get a look at what the front of the shop looks like. What struck me about it, though, is the design of it looks so kind of late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah,
Reminds me
like it's taken from the Trocadero and just shoved in China. It's weird because he was also, when he first came in, he said, we're a forward-looking company and stuff, and we're not going to totally focus on nostalgia. But I'm guessing that, a lot of the franchises will be in there, will be modern things. Even though they are doing like stuff like the Crazy Taxi remake, that might mean that they'll start to have, branded stuff in there, collector's editions, stuff like that. But it might all be for the modern line, or they might totally go with, Dreamcast bags and all of that stuff. But that all seems to be like licensed out to different places at the moment. We've been covering in the news, like Zara's had some Dreamcast stuff and Master System stuff, and maybe they're going to consolidate it all into one place.
Well, to me, the design of it looks very retro. It kind of reminds me of like a Game Station. Used to look like here in the UK, a lot of kind of silver. Like everything was in that era. And then in the window, they've got 2 statues of Sonic, but it's Sonic from like Sonic Adventure, kind of the skinny legs, tall. It looks like, doesn't look like the movie Sonic.
No, it's definitely like that kind of like late 90s to kind of like mid 2000s Sonic.
If you've been to Alton Towers, there's like a statue that looks very similar, a bigger one that you can stand in front of.
Oh, the ride that they've got there. Yeah, 100%. It's definitely like 2002 Sonic, isn't it?
Well, they have been talking about a new Sonic game as well. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, but I think it's a cool idea. I mean, like you said, Joe, it's only planned in China and Japan at the moment. But I mean, as someone did point out in the GameSpot article comments, Nintendo opened their first shop in 2001. So it took them kind of 20 years to be confident enough to start rolling it out. So I guess they want to get the direction right first to make sure that it is actually a hit before, over-expanding a bit too quick. I think it's cool. I mean, I imagine again, I said I bought a T-shirt at the one in at the Nintendo shop in Japan, in New York. There was actually a nice little cabinet in there with kind of all of their consoles over the years, a little kind of museum.
Yeah.
That I thought was quite nice. But yeah, it's not the kind of place you're going to be able to go in and play on a Dreamcast and a Mega Drive and that, by the looks of it. I imagine it's going to be, mainly, like you said, plushies, bags, T-shirts, that kind of thing. I mean, that Sega are not in the hardware business anymore, probably won't sell.
I don't find that as interesting as like the Raspberry Pi store or going into a Mac store or kind of a computer-based one. Plushies and stuff, they've got their place.
Yeah, and the one in New York, like the Nintendo store, was just full of tourists, really. Wasn't many locals in there by the looks of it. So I imagine this is probably that kind of thing. You go to Japan, you want to come home with like a Sonic T-shirt or something, which you'd be straight in there, Joe, as would I.
Oh, yeah,
obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just cool to see it, though, isn't it? A Sega-branded store in a shopping mall. So fingers crossed to do end up rolling out. So we want to check out the location so far and the pictures. I'll put that in this week's show notes. While we're talking about Sega moving as well, I saw a couple of people quite sad about this news. Actually, Sega in the UK are leaving their Brentford-based headquarters and moving on to pastures new. Now, the reason a lot of people have been quite sad about this is if you drive on the M4 motorway in Brentford in the UK, from the motorway you can actually see Sonic kind of wagging his finger. This is like early 90s style Sonic. A big mascot of Sonic the Hedgehog on the side of the Sega HQ, which people said, they've loved seeing that when they're in the morning commute for like the last 20 years. And it's going to be sad to see that not existing anymore because the building's actually getting demolished, which is quite sad.
So a Sonic's still based there. Have Sega been based there the whole time in the UK, and then
since 2004 they've been there.
Oh, okay, and now they're moving to a new building because I didn't know Sega was still in the UK. To be perfectly honest, like an actual big building. I know a few people who've mentioned YouTubers and stuff, Slopes, who's worked there, and he's go, oh yeah, I went down to Sega, but I don't know. I always just kind of assumed it was like a rented office space, within like another office.
Well, it looks like it might be turning into that by the sounds of it. They're moving on to an industrial estate.
This big HQ with like a huge Sonic on it, to be honest.
Well, they moved in there just after kind of the Dreamcast era. So, I mean, it does look quite extravagant for the size of a modern office block. It does maybe look a bit oversized.
It's a bit of a random place, Brentford, as well. Like a lot of the tech companies are in the famous Silicon Roundabout in London. Which is kind of showing how Britain is. They've got Silicon Valley. We had the Silicon Roundabout. I think they call it East London Tech City now. But it's interesting to see. I remember the big Psygnosis building in Liverpool that had the owl on the front as well. And seeing that go, disappointing. But things move on.
They do, and they're actually moving to Chiswick Business Park.
Well, Chiswick might have a big Sonic now, so yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm wondering, so a lot of people have been talking about this. I saw Guru Larry mentioning it's going to be sad that it goes, and Slopes as well. He mentioned that, he's been in the building. They're going to be demolishing it and turning it into housing, because apparently it's quite close to Brentford Football Club's G-Tech Community Stadium, so the value of the land's kind of gone up in recent years, apparently. So, it's been bought, so they're having to move and they're going to be demolishing the building. But a lot of people have said, looking at that massive Sega sign and the Sonic mascot, they reckon that's probably around 25 foot. People are already saying they want to approach the owners and can we buy that?
All these nerds what are you doing with that sign?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what will happen? You remember about 5 years ago, we reported about the, what arcade unit was it? What's it called? The giant ball that you sit in, the jet game.
Oh, the Sega R360.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
In about 10 years' time, do you think we'll be reporting on the Retro Hour in the news that somebody's found a 25-foot Sonic billboard dumped in a field somewhere?
Yeah, so developers go and just dump it because they don't want to deal with all us nerds begging for it. But yeah, I mean, it would be. I mean, they might take it with them to the new place. It's definitely got that kind of historical value there. But yeah, I imagine a lot of people will be eagerly asking if they can have that on their well, you probably couldn't fit it on your bedroom wall. Let's get a massive house. But yeah, so good luck, Sega, in your new move. And if you want to see the pictures of their current HQ, if like Joe, you didn't think they still had a massive HQ in the UK, either go on the M4 before they move out, you can get a look at it, or I'll put a link in the show notes to some pictures too. Now, this looks incredible. Actually quite hard to really describe how great this is on an audio-only podcast, because visually, this is what is stunning about this. And also it's pretty cool who's behind it as well. Now, this is a new Space Harrier-style on-rail shooter that's coming out for the Vectrex.
Yeah, this looks decent. I've not really played the Vectrex much. It's a system that I've always lusted after, seen the graphics, and really kind of wanted one. And it's good to see that there's new developments for it. I'm just not sure if I know of any working Vectrexes with any of my friends. Maybe it would be an emulator kind of game that I'd be able to experience this on, or at like a gaming event where I just go in. That
was going to be my point there, that this is one game where you have to play it on original hardware by the looks of it to get the full value out of it.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about it is the guy who's developed it. So the game is called Neon Hawk, and as Ravi's just pointed out, and Dan, it is, it's not just an emulated game, it's fully working on original Vectrex hardware, and he's been working on it for about a year. But this is actually a games developer. Is it Mikko Hovinen? I think is how you say it. I'm not too sure. He's Finnish. And he is actually a game developer who's worked on loads of famous games, Max Payne 2, Alan Wake, just to name a few, Quantum Break. He's obviously a big fan of the Vectrex, and says, he loves its, the 80s take of it, and, how it was something different back in the day compared to everything else that was on the market. But in terms of like what he's got the Vectrex doing, I think it's more the speed of it, if anything. So it describes it as kind of like Space Harrier-esque rail shooter. But to me, it kind of reminds me more of like, obviously graphically it's wireframe, but imagine like F-Zero or Wipeout in like wireframe form, but then you can shoot like enemies that come after you, which kind of remind me of Space Invaders, but then in 3D wireframe.
They're massive as well.
Yeah, they're massive. They're like, I was going to say the sprites, but, the enemies and everything are massive. There's like loop-to-loops and like corkscrews and everything on the track that you're like, flying around and stuff and driving on. It looks really, really impressive. But, even down to the logo of the game, Neon Hawk, I'm with Ravi here. I feel like I'd boot this up like at Play Expo and it'd just like blow up the Vectrex or something. It's like, whoops.
I've seen demos like Bad Apple and stuff run on the Vectrex, and it's massively impressive what they can do with it. But I think you really need to experience it on that CRT. I think there's oscilloscopes where you can actually run Vectrex stuff on them. So there might be other ways of doing it. There's a flash cart available for the Vectrex, so you can flash it onto there. I think it's amazing though that we're actually getting development for this system so many years later, and I hope that it all comes out boxed and kind of produced in a nice way, because there's also that overlay that you can get on the top, so I'm wondering if it would have overlay support as well.
That would be cool, actually. Yeah, big box version of it. It comes with the overlay and everything. That'd be really cool.
I love the way some of the enemies are made up in the game as well. Like if you watch there's a couple of trailers for it. The first one, the teaser trailer, and there's an article on Time Extension with them all embedded, and a link as well if you want to read a bit more. But I put them in the show notes. There's one bit where it looks like a dragon kind of comes along, but it's kind of made up of loads of different like kind of little wire frames behind it. So it's kind of multi-part, isn't it? But they all kind of flow together to give the impression of like a massive enemy.
Really smart, isn't it, how he's made it?
Yeah, so looks really impressive. Again, I mean, like you guys, I've never owned a Vectrex. I know Ravi, for years you were considering getting one, weren't you, until you realised kind of they do need quite a bit of maintenance.
Yeah, for me it would be like, I've already got 2 CRTs that need repairing down here. It'll probably just add to the pile,
Yeah, but it does look really cool. So, that is work in progress at the moment. If you want to check out the trailers, I'll put those in this week's show notes. If you have got a Vectrex, something to get very excited about by the looks of it. Now, if you're a GameCube fan, and this is quite funny actually, because I've shown off my GameCube that I randomly found in a drawer on the last Patrons Hangout. I went there to get my Dreamcast and thought, oh, there's my GameCube.
I really wonder what's in your drawers, Dan, if you're finding GameCubes in there.
Yeah, well, who knows? But one thing I do know I have is a Wavebird. Now, the Wavebird was, I think, probably the first wireless controller that most people used reliably, which was still to this day, a lot of people regard the Wavebird as one of the best video game controllers of all time. Now, this came out back in the early 2000s. It was an official Nintendo product, and it was a wireless controller, full controller as well, for the GameCube that actually commands quite a lot of money if you look on eBay these days. The only thing is, it came in 2 parts. Because actually, rather than using infrared, like a lot of the earlier wireless controllers used back in the 90s, this actually used RF, didn't it? Radio frequencies. But you needed an RF receiver that you plugged into the controller port on your GameCube.
Which, to be fair, was probably why it was so good, because I do remember a lot of those infrared ones back in the days.
Oh, they were terrible, yeah.
Man, they were awful, yeah.
Well, you had to have a line of sight with them, didn't you? Because I remember the only system I had that used an infrared controller, I think, was the Commodore CDTV. And that had an infrared controller. But then, yeah, if you were in the middle of playing like a game and you moved it up and it wasn't looking directly at the machine, you'd lose connection. You had to put it back down.
And these are Smash Bros players playing this as well, so they need their accuracy.
Yeah, that latency's got to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the problem is, I mean, like I said, it comes in 2 parts, and it turns out a lot of people have apparently lost their wireless receivers that you plug into the GameCube. The reason I mention this is because looking at my GameCube the other day, I could have sworn mine was plugged into the front, but it's not there anymore. So I may have misplaced my Wavebird receiver. So this is actually quite timely because someone has created a project called the Wave Phoenix to bring your controllers back to life for just $5.
Okay, this is bonkers because what this guy's done is this is something that could have been charged for. This is something that, you know, he could have made a bit of money on, but he's actually put it out there for free on GitHub, all the plans, which I think is really good because it's a weird niche thing, you know, missing that kind of adapter. But being able to get it running for that little price, you know, he's actually got the PCB available. You can 3D print the case. The connectors are from like AliExpress, and yeah, it's really simple to do. It's a cool little device with loads of features, and I think it's great that he's just put it out there.
And use off-the-shelf parts as well, which is pretty good. So like I said, you can build your own for $5. I mean, do you know what are they expensive? Like are crazily pricey now when you see them at trade shows and stuff. The Wavebird.
They're generally, if you can find them without the receiver, which obviously makes them useless, they're about 30 quid, 20 to 30 quid. With the receiver, they're about 70, I would say, maybe 65. Yeah. And then obviously, ideally, you know, nice, brand new in the box kind of thing. You're talking more like 150, not brand new, you know what I mean? But, you know, generally really nice condition in the box, about 150. So they do seem quite rare. If you jump on eBay, I would say it's about 50-50 the listings are, for some of them with the receiver and some of them without. And I do see them at trade shows and I go, oh, that's a good price. Like, that's a really good price. And I go, oh, yeah, it's because I've got a receiver. Like, it's just there on a table kind of thing. But yeah, you know, Ravi's spot on. A lot of competitive players like the Wavebird, and it's considered one of the greatest controllers of all time, which is quite funny because, like you guys say, it's the first one that seemed to work really, really well. So when I read this and it was like, oh, it's only $5, I was like, oh my God, that's insane. But then it's the amount of work that goes into it. This is beyond me, you know, making a little PCB board. And
you've got your soldering kit now, Joe.
I know, I've got a soldering kit. And
well, the thing is, you could order the PCB board as well from a company. So yeah.
I'm sure our friends at PCB Way could make you one up.
Oh yeah, maybe they could. They could, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also, it's got modern features as well. So I don't know what the old ones were like to pair. But this,
you had like a little disc, didn't you, where you had to like set the RF channel?
Yeah, you literally just hooked it up. You just put the disc on the bottom of the controller to like channel 2, and then you did the same on the receiver and plugged into the GameCube. It was really easy, to be fair. They just paired straight up. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think this is cool. That, you know, obviously, like you said, there are a lot of Wavebirds in the wild without the receiver. So it's cool that this exists and it can make those useful again. I have seen a couple of people comment, though, that outside of this, it would be really good if someone else could maybe make a little adapter that works in your GameCube with Bluetooth on there that would allow you to connect to the new GameCube controllers that Nintendo are bringing out for the Switch 2 to allow them to use on the original hardware.
Have Bluetooth capabilities as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe they can hack it up somehow.
Yeah. Well, that would be cool. Yeah, because then you could use a brand new wireless controller as well. So the range of the Wavebird I was reading here in the comments, someone said it's about 90 feet. That it goes, which is like ridiculously. Not that you can be able to see the screen from there. Let's go to. Maybe you're projecting your GameCube on the side of your house or something.
I wonder how RF interference is.
Yeah,
as well
that's the thing.
Yeah,
that's why it's got the different channels on there.
Transmitters in your house or something.
Yeah, so very cool to see those. If you have got a Wavebird you want to bring that back to life, if you've lost that receiver, then you can download those from GitHub, get the plans and everything. So I'll link that in this week's show notes. Now, there's one final story for everyone else. Patrons have got a couple of extra ones coming up. We do that every week, just for our patrons. Another Sega story, actually. And this is causing a bit of split reaction from the comments I've seen. I personally think it looks pretty good, but I know the game itself has always interestingly been one that divides fans. A lot of people think it's an awful game, others love it. I think I fall more into the camp of someone who actually enjoys playing it. We're talking about Altered Beast, that has actually got a free fan-made remake. Were you a fan of Altered Beast back in the day, Joe?
You know what? I want to say, like, yeah, Altered Beast. You know, whenever I talk, like, you know, when it's like, I end up talking to somebody new, and I'm a little bit like, telling you about himself or whatever, and you're just like, oh yeah, I do a podcast about retro games, and like, oh really, what about? And you say like, oh, Sega Mega Drive, and it's 50-50. Some people, will go, oh, Altered Beast, like, and I think, what, Altered Beast needs more love. They only ever had like 3 games, like in the last 37 years it's existed. It hasn't been a game in like 20 years, if that. But then I look back at it fondly, but I think, when I actually sit down and I play it every couple of years on like some sort of compilation, I play it for 5 minutes and just go, yeah.
Well, maybe to me it's a bit of the rose-tinted spectacles, because I used to play it in the arcade quite a lot. I'd always see it when I was a kid in arcades at the seaside and play it. And then I remember when one of my mates got a Mega Drive and he had it at home, and I remember thinking that was really cool. But it's probably been, maybe 25, 30 years since I properly sat down and played it. So, again, maybe if I played it today, it will be a similar kind of feeling.
I like the music and the transformations.
Rise from your graves. I always loved that was one of my favourite things about it, the transformations that you could, basically you'd have two, like a tag team almost, wasn't it? Your fighter. I love the world it's built in as well. I mean, it's always been quite an interesting game to me, and I love the variety of levels on there. But the reason we're talking about this is someone's actually made a new version of Altered Beast that you can play on PC, Mac, Linux. There's also an HTML5 version that you can play in browser as well. Altered Beast Remake, which is a retooling of the original game with some really cool kind of upgraded graphics. Now it's in widescreen as well. Although some people I've seen in the comments are not all that keen on the new look of it. To me, it's not radically different, but there are some definite kind of changes to the enemies in there that you can see.
So I was watching this as like a nice 14-minute kind of playthrough of it, trailer, if you will.
Yeah.
And there's all new transformations in it, and obviously different new enemies and different levels and backgrounds and everything like that. And it's funny because, like you say, like the fans of the original were very split, 50-50, whether they love it or hate it. And I'm reading the comments as well, and I'm like, oh yeah, people are like, oh, this is really cool. And then some people are like, this looks awful, it's jank kind of thing.
The original game was janky anyway, that wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I quite liked the look of it. And then I was skipping through it. And then it came across a boss fight, and it was fighting a giant snake. And I was like, hang on, that's the giant snake from Story of 4, or Beyond Oasis for people in America. And I was like, wait, let's pay attention to this. And I really started paying attention to it. And I think this is quite cool. And nobody seems to have mentioned it in the comments, or at least the comments I've read. It's all sprite work from other 16-bit and 32-bit 2D games. And there's a lot of sprites in there from Ghosts and Goblins, Castlevania, Story of 4. And there doesn't seem to be any mention of that anywhere. And now I just
like the Golden Axe little guys as well.
The Golden Axe. Yeah. There's Golden Axe in there as well as obviously Altered Beast. And I don't know if he's used some AI upscaling on a lot of these graphics and stuff, because it does all look very smoothed out. And when you kind of ask ChatGPT to kind of on blur something, and it sends you a cartoon version of the picture, and you're like, all right, okay. It does look like the graphics. It does look like that's been done. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, they definitely look upscaled, because there's a difference with the ones he's replaced. They do look a lot sharper than the existing graphics, and there is a bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, there is that disconnect there, but I quite like the look of it. I want to play it. I've not had a chance to have a little play of it yet, but like you say, you can play it in browser and stuff. There does look like to be quite a bit of slowdown in it, which a few people were complaining about. But I was like, I'm sure the original has
that's what I thought as well. I was like, it doesn't look 60 FPS. And I'm like, I remember the original one being quite janky, really slow-moving scrolling anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, cool. Give Altered Beast some love. Go give it a play and just see what you think. But I thought it kind of became a game of, for me, trying to name the game the sprites were from. Yeah. But I was quite enjoy that. Quite like that.
Yeah, it looks fun. It's free to play as well. So if you want to get hold of that Altered Beast remake, that link in this week's show notes. So I'm going to be talking to this week's special guest, Stuart Maine, talking about some of the classics he worked on, worked at Psygnosis, worked on stuff like Theme Hospital, Dungeon Keeper as well back in the day, and his amazing new book going inside the world of the FPS in its blockbuster era. He's coming up on the podcast in just a moment. Before we do that, let's take a quick second to give a massive thank you to this week's sponsor, our wonderful friends at Shopify. Shopify are the ones with the sound I'm sure you recognise by now. The sound of making another sale. And the reason that Shopify is growing massively recently, so many companies are using it, massive household names like Mattel and Gymshark, to people that are just getting started as well. We've used it for well over a year now to sell our books. I mentioned my missus has been selling some for arts and crafts stuff on there, some for embroidery. Really, whatever stage you're at with your business, Shopify is there to support you every step of the way. It is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses all around the world. And the thing we love about it, and the reason that we've used it for so long and love having them as a sponsor, is just it takes away all the headache out of selling online and in person. It's got incredible themes. And it's even got, like most things do these days, it's got AI tools in there as well. They can help you with your product descriptions, your page headlines, even enhance your photography too. Those themes, though, are just so time-saving. You set our store up, Ravi. It's like a breeze to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you can set zones and do postage, have different global rates. It's fantastic, and you can also set up inventories, which are really useful. So if you're out at a show or an event and you've got someone, asking for something, you can check in your inventory. It's all there, and they can also access it online, mobile or on desktop as well.
Yeah, and they've got those little point-of-sale systems as well that you can use, to take card payments when you're out and about at events. Syncs all your inventory as well. So if you're selling anything, absolutely give Shopify a try today. They've also got some really great marketing tools as well. It's almost like having your own marketing team. You can create email and social media campaigns, sell across all of the social media marketplaces, and it is just incredible to use. So if you want to give it a try, why don't you check out Shopify for this incredible trial that we've got for you right now. So if you sell anything else, a no-brainer this. You can check it out for just $1 or £1 a month. Use our link, shopify.co.uk/retro-hour. All lowercase, shopify.co.uk/retro-hour. Try it out for £1 a month. I'll put that link in the show notes. And a massive thank you to our friends at Shopify, and get ready to hear a lot more of this. All right, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. More for you, of course, on next Friday's podcast. And next, this week's special guest talking to game designer and author Stuart Maine. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're with the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. Now, today, I'm going to be joined by someone who's actually been a games designer for over 28 years now, worked on some incredible titles as well, doing a QA for stuff like Theme Hospital and Dungeon Keeper, worked for Psygnosis back in the day as well, and has actually been an author about the games industry as well. He's actually done 2 incredible books for our sponsor, Bitmap Books. You may have heard us talking about I'm Too Young to Die, and the new book that covers the blockbuster age of the first-person shooter. And it's available this month. Pre-orders open right now. I'll link it in the show notes. A new book is called Hurt Me Plenty. So to talk a bit more about that and his career as well, we thought we'd welcome on Stuart Maine. How's it going, Stu?
Yeah, good. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, appreciate you taking some time to chat to us and hopefully do some reminiscing this week as well. Now, one thing we always like to ask our guests to kind of get your geek credentials, as it were. It's kind of where it all began. I mean, do you remember what initially got you into gaming, like your earliest gaming memory?
So the first console we had was a Fairchild Channel F, of all things, which was a gift. And I remember struggling with some of the games because we had a black and white TV and I didn't realize it was in color and things like this. But then, the Amstrad and Atari ST, and then, I just remember the early days of games like Night Law or Myth and just exploring worlds that didn't exist. That kind of blew my mind as a kid.
So I know that you've worked in the industry for, as we mentioned before, over 28 years now. I mean, kind of, what was the link there then? How did you go from being a gamer to actually working in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think, I can't work in games. It just didn't even occur to me. They were just made by alien people somewhere else or something. And I was working in a cyber cafe and teaching people how to use the internet because it was back when it was brand new. And I just saw on Bullfrog's webpage that you could go there and be unpaid QA for a couple of weeks if you just wanted to. So I took some holiday, got a B&B, and spent a couple of weeks. And they wanted me to play Theme Hospital, and I kept poking them until they let me play Dungeon Keeper, which, looking back now, wouldn't have been much point. It was way too early. They didn't need QA on it, but I enjoyed playing it. And so that was my insight into the games industry, like this Bullfrog's offices and people playing games in the evening and getting pizza and watching Die Hard and stuff like this. And I was like, okay, I want to do this for a living. There were no qualifications or universities or anything back then. So I just went, okay, and just started making Quake levels as a portfolio, because I just needed to prove that I could do game design, which was bizarre because I had no game design experience. So, but nobody did at that point. And I sent those to Psygnosis, the Stroud office just outside Cheltenham. And that got me. I mean, I was like an hour late for the interview, which was unfortunate because of travel, but they still offered me the job. So, I must have made an impression. And so those Quake levels, even though you look back at them now, they're pretty basic and crude. They were enough to kind of get me into the industry.
And what made you pick Quake? Because I was going to ask you what your experience was, kind of like with level design and game design at that point. Was there a particular reason you thought, I'm going to go for Quake? Was it just because it was very popular at the time, or it was a good way to show off skills?
I mean, it was a bit. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was a bit of everything. We played the hell out of it at the cyber cafe that we worked because we can install it on all the machines and such. And they were quite good machines, so they could run it. But also, I mean, I made Duke Nukem levels, but I just found them a bit limited compared to the 3D world of Quake. And there's just something about the atmosphere of that game. It still has kind of this otherworldly thing that I just loved it. And so it was just you could run it. The editors on PCs, whereas things like 3ds Max back in the day were quite hard work for a computer and expensive. So it was available and I loved the game, and you could just play with it. And so it was the right thing at the right time. It just gave me the opportunity, basically, I'm
interested a bit more about kind of what it was like at Psygnosis as well, because obviously they're a huge company. By the time you were there, I imagine they were owned by Sony.
That's right.
I mean, kind of tell us a bit about the atmosphere then. So what was the Stroud office like? We always hear about Liverpool, but what was it like there in Stroud?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I had nothing to compare it to. It was my first games job, but it was cool. They did Assault Rigs, the first G-Police, Overboard, a flight simulator, a bunch of stuff like that. And so I joined just before they started the sequel to G-Police. And there were 2 floors, and then they bought a 3rd floor in this building. And it was interesting. You talked to the other floors, but you didn't really talk to the rest of the company. Like once a year, the company would show each other their games, what they were working on in all these different offices. But other than that, you only kind of got, you knew more than the public, but not much more. It was weird. Like we were always kind of jealous of like colony wars and things that they were doing to their spaceships. And we were like, oh, we need to do better than that. It was funny. It wasn't really, they weren't really collaborating, or at least not that I saw. But it was cool. There were some good people there, and so I learned a lot, basically, really fast. You just kind of got thrown in at the deep end. It was good.
I've got visions of it just being like, guys, how we're making G-Police? They've got a spaceship on the 4th floor.
Yeah, basically. And we were like, all right, well, then in the sequel to G-Police, you're going to go into space in a spaceship. We were just trying to one-up each other, basically. You would see these games. It was cool. We didn't know what the others were working on more, they just got shown these things.
Yeah. And what was that? You mentioned G-Police. The sequel to G-Police was the kind of first big game that you worked on. What was that like? You're young, you've not worked in the games industry other than in an internet cafe. Prior to that, what was the pressure like? Because, you've gone from Quake and now you're in G-Police and you're completely flying around, free roaming environment rather than pinned to the floor. What was that like?
Yeah, and it was interesting because the G-Police missions were scripted with text. There was this big file that basically ran from the top to the bottom and said, when this happens, do this. And so you're just writing these massive documents and then plugging everything in. But it was cool because I was new. There was another guy called Graham Sargent who went on to Reflections and the Bitmap Brothers. We were both brand new designers, and we didn't know that we couldn't do it. So we were just going, basically. And like from Sensible Software, is it Jules? He was the producer on the team and stuff like this. There were these people that you were like, oh, okay, cool. This guy is kind of famous to me as a developer, and now I'm working with him. There was a lot of overtime, a lot of pizza, a lot of Quake death matches, because I kept making levels in my spare time, and we used to play them at lunchtime and stuff. But it was funny because we wanted the game to be really good, and I didn't know any better, but basically we were just sailing past deadline after deadline. They were not interested in hitting them. And I think that's part of what killed the studio in the end, because like nowadays, I'd be horrified at what we were doing in terms of, well, if we had this long and we're just not even trying to hit that deadline, then that's costing this much money. But then I had no idea, and I was like, okay, this is cool. So it was a bit of a shock when Sony went, okay, we're shutting Psygnosis.
I bet, yeah, such a legendary brand as well. I know a lot of people bought them and were like, this is part of the portfolio now. They couldn't imagine them ever not using the name after they paid all that money for it. I remember that kind of shocked me at the time too. It must have been even more shocking working inside and that happening.
Yeah, it was sudden. They immediately laid off all the team leaders. So me and this other new designer were left to finish the game on our own, which was a shock. And then just like, I don't know, a week before, they'd flown the head of development at the studio out to Japan to see what we didn't know then was the PlayStation 2. And we were like, oh my God, we can do a G-Please for this. It's going to be incredible. And then a week later, they closed everything. So it was, I'd say, I hadn't experienced that before. And it's a shame as well, because the sequel to G-Please, I played it again, and I think it holds up, but nobody played it because even though they released it, they didn't market it, of course. So nobody ever heard of it. And there's like, oh, okay, welcome to the games industry.
I know you worked on B-17 Flying Fortress, the Mighty Eighth as well, with Dominic Robinson. Tell us the story there then, and what memories you've got of that time and how you got involved there.
Well, basically, when they closed the office, about half the people went and set up Acclaim Cheltenham, like 20 minutes down the road. And the other half of us went to Bristol to work for a company called Wayward Design on B-17. And so we were doing the terrain, and because it was a motion captured game, it was animated game. You had the crew, you had to send people to help each other, and if they started panicking, you had to send someone to slap him around the face and stuff like this. And I remember crawling around in our actual B-17 in a museum to take pictures of it, which was terrifying. The kind of respect you had for them went up 1,000,000% when you realized what they were doing, like in these aircraft. It was nuts. So we made B-17, and then we got bought by Rage because they had a lot of money after Incoming. And we started making games for them, but when they collapsed, and that eventually killed that studio, and then we joined Acclaim Cheltenham. So it was this kind of weird circle that we were there, we were sucked back into it, whether we wanted to or not.
So a lot of our listeners love hearing about games that never made it, got cancelled for whatever reason. You worked on Andy McNabb's team SAS and The Last Job. What can you tell us about them games?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I didn't know. I mean, the games industry, for every game I've made, there's been 2 or 3 that have never come out for some reason or another.
Okay. Yeah.
We did like a Go-Go Beckham game, which was on the GameCube, which was like a Magic Soccer sort of style game.
I've heard about that game before, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. They did a GBA version, and then we were doing a 3D one, and Rage collapsing killed that. Andy McNabb's Team SAS, of all the games I've worked on that never came out, that's the one that I regret the most, because I think it was cool. It was we were making the Xbox version, and it was a 0 to 4 player shooter, in that we scripted all 4 SAS characters in this jungle, and then you could just say, I want to play that one, and it would let you take over. And if you didn't, you would just carry on all. So technically you could watch it and the AI would play the whole thing on its own.
Oh, wow.
Or you could have 4 of you playing and no AIs and stuff like this. Andy McNabb did motion capture, and we spent some time with him. He was an interesting character. I've worked with a few ex-SAS people for another game as well, and they are all perfectly nice people, but they have the most horrifying stories, and they find them hilarious. And they just like, and he went down as well. No, you don't shoot people in the brain because they might pull the trigger or scream. You have to shoot them at the top of the spine because then they die instantly. And you're like, thanks very much. And you're writing this down, but part of you is going, oh my God, what's happening? This is
having these conversations over lunch in the canteen. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And they did motion capture and he needed to throw one of the other developers around and he wasn't like an actor where he's going, I won't hurt you. He was just throwing them around and the other guy was being punished. But yeah, it was a cool game. But when Rage died, we tried to carry it on, but another studio I can't name was handling the PlayStation 2 version, and that wasn't very good. So we couldn't sell the game to another publisher fast enough because the money was all made by the PlayStation 2 version. Even though the Xbox was amazing, there were just vastly more PS2s. And so we couldn't keep the studio going, basically, and it was just died. And then, yeah, went to Acclaim Cheltenham, and about 3-4 months later, that got shut down because Acclaim was dying. And the last job, or Heist, it was originally called Heist with like a $sign, but there was another game called that, so they had to change it. But that was an interesting game as well. It was like a single-player, multiplayer game in that these 4 characters were trying to rob banks and stuff like this, and you played each one after the other. But it took the timing of the last one and used it for the next one.
Right.
So if it took you 4 minutes to hack the door, then the next character had to wait 4 minutes before the door would open and stuff like this. And it kept rippling forward. It was a clever idea. But yeah, then Acclaim died spectacularly, revealed that they weren't going to pay us, and everybody stole everything out of the studio, which was astonishing. I've never seen anything like it, because they were basically like, well, you can have it back when you pay us. So for a long time, me and a housemate, our coffee table was 2 PlayStation 2 dev kits with a whiteboard on the top. And those things were vastly expensive. And we were like, you can't do anything with them, but you're not having them until you pay us. It was bizarre. It's like, that's not how you shut a company down. Don't tell people at the end of the month, by the way, we're not paying you for the month you've just done.
Yeah, it was a cost more in the long run than you were taking those developments.
Yeah, I mean, it all got sorted eventually, but it was bizarre, basically. So, yeah.
I know if people want to play Team SAS, there's a great website that we talk about quite a bit by Frank Gaskin, The Games That Weren't. You actually helped uncover some kind of the assets that you still had and some of the files as well. I mean, did you kind of always have these, or was this something you kind of rediscovered, and what kind of state are they in? Yeah,
when I was there, I had burned a disc for the E3 build that we had done to try and attract attention. And the same with the last job. And I just had them sat on a shelf for, 20 years or whatever it was. And I thought, actually, I need to do some of these because otherwise they're just going to degrade and they're going to die. And so, yeah, I met Frank from The Games That Weren't at a party and just handed them over, basically, because I was like, well, somebody, you can upload these, you can get them working and stuff like that. And it did take apparently a bit of work to get them to work. But, at least somebody could try them if they wanted, rather than they just disappear forever, which was the alternative.
Yeah, when you put that much work in as well, actually seeing it out there in some form must be a bit rewarding, at least, I suppose.
Yeah, I did have to check the disc to make sure, is there anything on this disc that can't be seen? Because at the time, you didn't know what you were burning. You were just copying everything. But no, it was all good in the end.
So what made you take the leap from designing games to writing about them, starting with I'm Too Young to Die?
Yeah, I mean, it was effectively lockdown, the COVID and such. It didn't really affect me in that we could work from home. I'd seen Bitmap's work and their books were amazing. And I just went, well, I love first-person shooters. I played the hell out of all of them and, I had a connection with them. And so I just emailed them blind and said, hey, can I write you a book? And they just went back and forth, like, who are you? And can you prove that you can write? And can you prove that you know what you're talking about? And eventually just took a gamble and it just kicked off, and it was like 2 and a bit years later, basically. So.
Well, tell us about the first book then, for people that haven't seen it. I mean, what is I'm Too Young to Die about?
It's a celebration of the first-person shooter. So it doesn't try to cover all of them, but it tries to cover all the interesting ones or all the bizarre ones or the most popular ones and whatever. So it starts with the kind of precursors, the sort of dungeon crawlers, the step-by-step games, the maze games, light gun shooters, all the things that led to the birth of the first-person shooter genre. And it kind of argues that the first ever first-person shooter was a Sega game called Missile, which was so old it didn't even have electronics; it was mechanical. And then, it kind of explodes with Wolfenstein and Ultima Underworld, and then Doom, of course, and it just runs through up to 92 to 2000 and 2002, and it just kind of gives you the major games, the weird games, the failed experiments, the kind of hidden gems, stuff like that. Just try to talk about them all and talk about the kind of this evolution of the games market and the genre at the same time, kind of give you some insights. And then a whole bunch of people agreed to be interviewed, which was amazing. So getting to speak to people who did like the Freescape engine back in the day, and Warren Spector and John Romero and all these people, and they were just telling you these things. A lot of the things they were telling me is like, I can't print that. That's amazing. You told it to me, but I still can't print it because I'll get sued, or you'll get sued, or somebody will. It's not going to, But they were really generous for their time, and and it was a success. It sold out. They're reprinting it. It'll be out in a couple of weeks. And that led to the second one, basically.
So you mentioned hidden gems in there, and obviously you've done a lot of extensive research into it, like you say, 92 all the way to 2003, I think you said there. Was there any titles you discovered that you'd never heard of, that really stood out to you? Because obviously in the 90s, there wasn't an absolute abundance, in the early 90s at least, of first-person shooters. But was there anything where you were like, wow, I've never heard of that, that's really interesting?
Yeah, there are some really obscure little weird things. But stuff like Wrath of Earth, which is this... You're kind of in a robot suit, and it recharges in sunlight, and you have to go indoors, and it's dark, and you have power and lights, and it's kind of creepy, and you talk to people and shoot a lot of stuff. And it's amazing. And it was just done by this one guy, and his mum does the voiceover for the character, the computer. Nice. But yeah, it's just that sort of thing was just really bizarre. Yeah, there were just a lot of really strange little things. And I liked... So, for example, even though I played it before, there's a game called Asriel's Tear, which I'm a massive fan of, which came out just before 3D acceleration, and so runs like a pig even today on massive computers. It still struggles. But that one was a fascinating game, and just being able to look back at the history of these things. Because I didn't just want to kind of talk about the game. I wanted to go, well, who made this and why? And so finding out a lot of the sort of, the development stories was cool. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of other weird games from the first one. There was a lot of capstone stuff, which I'd heard. I had avoided them at the time. They were these kind of... They're so bad they're good developers. They release game after game. They did Tech War and Witchhaven and stuff like this. And it's weird. Everybody hates their games, but they've always got something strange and amazing in them. So they'll do like a Wolfenstein clone, but then you can knock down walls and you can set things on fire. You're like, well, you can't do those in Wolfenstein. That's amazing. But your game is obviously terrible. And you stole the sprites from Doom. Literally stole the Doom sprites and repainted them. So, but there was still something about these games that, so I like that sort of thing where you go, none of these games are just straight up unplayable. There's always something cool there. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we think of the 90s and the games that you cover in the first book of, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, obviously, but Marathon as well, which was a Bungie title that was originally for the Mac, and I think the Apple Pippin got a version of it as well. I mean, that kind of tends to fly under the radar a bit when we're talking about influential FPS games from the 90s. I mean, how important do you think that game was, and was that quite groundbreaking in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of it. I hadn't heard of Pathways to Darkness, which was their game before that, and you can really trace a line to Halo, basically, and to Destiny. All their games had weird health systems, and they had a lot of text, and things like Durandal, which is, like the AI that goes rampant in Marathon, is exactly like the AIs that go rampant. And I didn't realize Cortana is the name of a sword, like Excalibur, and Durandal is another one. They're all swords, and Bungie are just using these across their games. There are people that, this game is obviously set in the same universe as this game and stuff like this. And Marathon is a strange beast, but it is really good actually if you play it, because it's so dark and they have these horrible, weird aliens that kind of come out of nowhere. it still manages to be creepy, even though it's all, very old and such like. But yeah, you can see a straight line from there to Destiny. It's amazing.
I did play it on the Apple Pippin as well at a gaming event. It was actually ran pretty well. I was quite impressed at how well it ran for a console that's generally regarded as a bit of a flop and a bit of a laughing stock. I thought it was actually quite impressive.
Yeah, the consoles as well. That was the thing that, because when I started the first book, this is the first book I'd ever written, so I didn't really think about like a story, as it were. But it turned out there was one, which was this kind of, like, in the first book, it was quite hard to make a first-person shooter. The technology was hard. You couldn't go and buy it, unless you had a lot of money or you worked with id, for example. And so you basically have these games that are setting the rules and then following each other, and they're all on PC or like the Mac, but basically they're all on computers. And then suddenly the consoles come along and they rapidly overtake them in terms of sales, and they throw out the rulebook. You can see the whole genre shift when Medal of Honor comes out, Metroid Prime, and especially Halo. Suddenly they're all using 2 weapons, they're all got recharging shields. So the story of the first book was, this growing of the genre, and then the consoles coming along and pushing it all away. But console game first-person shooters were not like PC first-person shooters at the start. By the time of the second book, they are the same. They're just the same game, basically. But on the first book, they are a different game. They've got the same name, but they're not at all dissimilar.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you should mention that, GoldenEye, some would say, the greatest of all time, or where I like to see GoldenEye as, obviously you've got Doom and Wolfenstein and everything, but I see them as a different kind of genre, if you will. I always see GoldenEye as like the birth of modern first-person shooters for me. And obviously that famously brought FPS to the consoles in a huge way. Do you think, how did that change the landscape compared to PC-centric shooters? Do you think that might have been the start of what you were just saying there? With if only a couple of years later, it was kind of the same across console and PC. Would you say that's the start of it, or?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I think as well, because by the time of the second book, the console versions are selling way more than the PC versions. And so the console becomes the lead platform. And I think GoldenEye, like you say, the massive success of this, things like that, and Turok. Suddenly the N64 was the platform for first-person shooters, weirdly. Yeah. And then Microsoft get involved and everything changes. But yeah, that kind of slower paced, this rather than a clone of Doom where you're just running around as fast as you can. Suddenly you're having to think. And again, Metroid Prime just ran with that and said, actually, we're not even about the combat, really. We're about the exploration and the puzzles and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it showed that there was a market and that people would pay for these things, basically.
What about the modding culture of FPS games as well? I mean, how important do you think that was in kind of shaping the direction of first-person shooters during that era?
Yeah, I mean, we cover modding in both books in some degree, like They Hunger, which was this kind of iconic mod for all Half-Life players of a certain age. And it's interesting because, so one of the things I like to do, like there is a game, I can't remember what it's called, but basically it was kind of like a cyberpunk Doom, and it wasn't a success. It didn't do very well, but almost everybody who worked on it went to work at like Valve and places like this. And so the definition of success for these people is completely different to what, it's not sales. It's the fact that they've done this, they've proved it, and they've then gone on to these amazing careers. But yeah, modding, like from tiny little ones to these massive, great big changes or total conversions and stuff. And, the Oblivions and all this sort of thing where people just go, well, I want the game to be like this and I'm going to do it. It really just shows that, yeah, people want to be involved in these games and they want the game that they want, effectively. And you either deliver it or they're going to do it themselves. And that was interesting because going back to the consoles, of course, you couldn't easily mod a console. So it really, again, showed the difference, like the PC. Some of the PC games are not amazing, but they exist because they can. If you see what I mean, like, because anybody can make anything and nobody can say no. Whereas on a console, there's always somebody that can say no. So you've got this kind of wild landscape over here, and then this very professional landscape over here, sort of thing.
Well, that first book, I'm Too Young to Die, we talk about that as kind of the golden era of the FPS when, you know, it suddenly became a huge genre. The new book that lands this month, available from 21st of May, from our sponsor, bitmapbooks.com. You can go on there right now and get notified when the book's available. And this book, as you mentioned earlier, covers the years 2003 to 2010. So, I mean, do you kind of see like 2003, that kind of as a second benchmark in the FPS story, and how it developed in terms of a genre from the titles you covered in the original book?
The first one, I didn't know what the story was, and it kind of evolved and revealed itself. For the second one, the story was very clear right from the beginning that it was hard to make a first-person shooter in this golden era, but now, by the second book, it's easy. Like, there are engines everywhere, and anybody can just buy one or use one or make one. The technology has moved on, and so by the second book, it really quickly breaks into two paths. You've got these massive blockbusters, Call of Duties, the Ghost Recons and Rainbow Sixes, and things that are enormously expensive. And then on the other path, you've got these incredibly weird, quirky little bizarre games, many of which in that second period are all coming from Russia, bizarrely. I thought because all these huge games are coming, there aren't going to be any of these quirky little indie things. They kind of squash them. But actually, it really didn't turn out like that at all. There are just, like, the first book had 180 games, the second one has got 220, and I could easily add a good 100 more to that. I just had to stop because the book was getting too big. They're just enormous. It just went haywire in the second period, basically, because anybody could just make a game. It was easy. It was all about the content then, the ideas. Whereas the first one, even if you had ideas, you still couldn't necessarily execute them.
You mentioned the mid-2000s became all about kind of like military shooters there. What do you think made Call of Duty 4 stand out, you know, Modern Warfare stand out from other shooters at the time? You know, you mentioned Ghost Recon and, you know, Rainbow Six and stuff like that. Obviously, COD became absolutely huge at COD 4. What do you think made that stand out from the others in a sea of kind of like brown and green military games?
Yeah, that was our worry with Bitmap, with Sam from Bitmap. We were worried about, is this book going to be really drab and boring?
They're very visual books, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we really wanted them to look exciting. But I think, thankfully, we've avoided that problem. There's so many weird, colourful games, so it's fine. But yeah, it's funny. There was this massive deluge of World War II shooters, and they rapidly kind of overwhelmed that area. So then there was a little bit of Vietnam. That died pretty quickly because the jungle was quite hard for video games to render and also quite limited. And so Call of Duty 4 was a gamble. I interviewed one of the developers in the book, and the publisher kept a World War II shooter going as well because they weren't sure that a modern game was going to work. But the team, they had this whole thing, this kind of chip on the shoulder of, well, everybody thinks we're nerds because we make World War II games, and so we're going to show them where that's wrong and that we can make these amazing modern games. And so they really kind of, they talk about the fact that, you know, they had this game and it kind of felt World War II-y, and then they had to kind of work out, well, what does a modern warfare game look like? What's the difference? And stuff like All Gillied Up, which is kind of the standout level in that game, that was where they started to swing, where they were like, okay, hang on a second, this is the sort of game that we're making, this kind of very tense sort of thing. And yeah, it was a gamble, but it was a juggernaut. It rapidly just grew into the biggest gaming franchise in the world. And you can see the numbers in the book. The first few, like the World War II ones, they make a lot of money, but then once 4 comes out, the numbers just dwarf everything else. And suddenly everybody is trying to make their modern shooters and fight them for this kind of money. Yeah. You see Medal of Honor, which for a while was the game, like the first Call of Duty was codenamed Medal of Honor Killer because that was their goal. But by the end of it, Medal of Honor's dead. basically.
Yeah.
They have killed it. So, they just kind of very closely scripted everything. They really kind of made it much more intimate. And, it just paid off. It was a gamble, but it worked.
It kind of blows my mind that we're talking about Call of Duty 4 on a retro gaming podcast. And then I realized it was 18 years ago that game came out, which is just insane. But I mean, I remember playing that and, I took a bit of a break from gaming. I often kind of call it, my kind of gaming wilderness years in the early 2000s. Really got back into it around then, though. And that was kind of like, because I'd moved away from a lot of my friends and family. And I've got memories of playing Call of Duty 4 online with like my friends in Leeds, up in the Northeast, in London. And I think for me, the fact that was one of the first big multiplayer online games as well. I mean, did that kind of change the genre quite a lot? The fact that now consoles were connected and multiplayer became a massive thing?
Yeah, I mean, that actually started in the first book, things like Might and Magic Heroes. Yeah. And it's really interesting to watch the publishers go, we must be online. Like Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament have proved that there is a market for this. And then they would push multiplayer into their games and then nobody would play them. Because unless you have a lot of money to get people to play your game, they're going to stay where their friends are, of course. So there's these dead game after dead game. But Modern Warfare 4 was the first time that they had one team to make the single player and a completely separate team to make the multiplayer, because they recognized that this was like 90% of the player's time was in the multiplayer. So they put as much or more effort into that. And they established things, the modern stuff, like if you play Quake, it takes a while to kill a person, which is a bizarre sentence I didn't think I'd be saying. But in Modern Warfare, you can kill another player in a second. And that they call time to kill. That the game kind of started that thing that Counter-Strike did as well, where, the first person to see another person kills them, you're dead. Whereas in the old school games, you would bunny hop around shooting back and forth and stuff like that. And that immediately became kind of old fashioned, basically. So, yeah, and you can see that in this one, that Unreal kind of is the last bastion, and then Quake Live, but effectively they're all military online shooters and battlefields and stuff like this.
I know that Doom 3 is a game that often splits opinion, because obviously it was very different to the first two Doom games, and you do cover Doom 3 in the book too. What do you think that kind of stands in the legacy of id Software and the genre as a whole?
Yeah, that is, as you say, is a controversial game. I liked, so basically, Doom, they re-looked at it with like Doom 2016, and Doom 3 is kind of re-looking at Doom 2. It's this kind of story of, invasion, but actually told like a story rather than, okay, that's the backstory, now just start killing, sort of thing. And it really kind of tries to set the tone, and it's like Half-Life. It makes you play normality for a while and stuff like that. But it is a technology showcase, and at the time, I remember Edge saying, it can't possibly live up to its own hype, and that was its problem. It looked so amazing that when you played it, you're like, oh, okay, this is cool, but not amazing, if it were, So it really is a kind of like a roller coaster. It looks incredible. It's really atmospheric, but fundamentally it's just a load of monsters hiding in cupboards that jump out at you, sort of thing. So it couldn't deliver what it promised. So I interviewed John Romero in the first book, and he was very much obviously sort of one of the driving forces for Doom and Doom 2 and such like. Whereas Tim Willits is interviewed in this book, and he kind of took over that role on Doom 3. And it was really interesting talking to him, because he's still saying he thinks it's one of its best ever games, that from like his perspective, from the team's perspective, they did so much new stuff, breaking new ground. They couldn't hire the people they needed because they didn't exist. There was nobody doing this stuff. So they were like, well, who do we hire then, basically? So even though, it's very much kind of the black sheep of the Doom family, from his point of view, from the studios, he's arguing that actually it's one of their sort of best ever titles. Although, of course, saying it's the black sheep, there is actually the cancelled Doom 4. We cover that in the book as well. Call of Doom, as it was nicknamed. And I talked to him about that in the interview, which was cool.
What was the story with that then?
Well, basically, the reason the people had nicknamed it Call of Doom was they wanted to do a Call of Duty but Doom. So the idea was the demons had come to Earth and you were the resistance, and there were a lot of scripted sequences like Call of Duty, even had turret sections and stuff like this. And they spent a while on it, and then they just killed it and started from scratch. But one thing that's interesting was in Doom 2016, which was the replacement, the glory kills where you grab the demons, that was in this first Doom. So there were things that came from it that survived. But yeah, not many publishers would say, okay, you spent this vast amount of money, but we're going to scrap it and start again. But Bethesda could, because as he says in the book, like id has a kind of reputation. You can't release a bad id game. They have to be good. And so they took that gamble of starting from scratch. But yeah, it covers a couple of books, a couple of games that they canned. There was a Cthulhu style one that they started and killed as well. So that's interesting.
You mentioned something really interesting earlier in the interview. You mentioned, in the early 2000s, in the late 90s, games, first-person shooters, you had to think about them. They slowed down a little bit and stuff. And obviously, you kind of go into the military shooters, and Call of Duty sped things up and everything. You got all these really, really fast games. But then you've got other games like Mirror's Edge, which, is still fast, but it's different. And then you've got Portal, which, is essentially a first-person shooter, but it's a puzzle game. Do you think these completely flipped expectations of first-person shooters, or do you think, they were just kind of like one-offs or signs of the future?
I mean, I guess that comes down to like, what is a first-person shooter effectively? And games are weird because, like, in movies or books or comics or whatever, genres are based on content, like a horror or a romance or science fiction. Whereas games do that, but they also base it on technology and camera. So first-person shooter effectively means a game played from first person.
Yeah.
It doesn't, so theoretically, like we cover Fallout, and I class that as a first-person shooter. Fallout 3, obviously.
Yeah.
Because even though it's got all sorts of RPGs, you play it from first person and you shoot a lot of people and you can ignore a lot of the RPG stuff. So I think people started to look outside. They looked into different areas. So yeah, Portal is a fascinating example. And we interviewed one of the guys that did Nubacular Drop, which was the prequel to it, that became Portal. And they talk about that it was just a wild gamble at Valve. They had literally no idea if anybody was going to like this game. They were told to make it so quickly and cheaply that they set it in the Half-Life universe so they could use the assets that had already been made. It wasn't a story decision. It was purely a cheap decision, But there are others. There is a game called The Ball, which is like Portal, where you have this massive steel ball and you roll that around and squash enemies with it and stuff like that. There's a couple of other puzzle-based ones. And so, yeah, they do start to break up into, what can I do in first person and go from there sort of thing, rather than just put the crosshair on someone's head and shoot them sort of stuff. You get the stealth ones, like the Penumbra ones, and you get the kind of horror ones and the survival ones. So yeah, it's as long as they're played from first person and they are not a vehicle, because that, we didn't want to cover like Mech Warriors and stuff like that. It's too big. But as long as you do that, then what we count as a first person shooter was pretty wide, and there's a lot of stuff in there.
Well, talking about the location of games as well, I think is quite interesting. You mentioned like survival horror games, and it kind of felt like, the kind of Eastern European influence was kind of felt more, games like Stalker and Metro 2033. What do you think makes kind of that Eastern European kind of region quite interesting creatively for FPS games?
Yeah, in the first book, the Japanese games were the strange ones. They didn't obey the rules and they just did what they wanted. And in this one, it is very much that kind of Eastern European area. I think, even though I said earlier anybody could buy an engine, I'm not sure that was true for those guys. So they had to make their own technology, and so they made strange engines. You're kind of playing these translations as well, so that makes it harder. You don't know if the game makes no sense or the translation makes no sense, sort of thing. But they just did strange things. There's a game called You Are Empty, which is this very, very linear game, but it's set in this kind of Russia where you wake up from a coma and everybody's dead. And but it's extremely creepy and cool, and you just kind of walk around these empty environments while weirdos try and murder you. And then Scorpion was another game. They tried to make this really complicated game where you had this suit, and that failed. So they made a simpler game but kept the suit. And it's like Doom 3, but even darker, which is amazing. It gives you eye strain after a while. And there's a voiceover that says, you can't pick that up, no room in your inventory, something really long like that. Literally every time you step on something, if you can't pick it up, it drives you nuts. And if you look at all these things, you go, well, this is a bad game. But actually there's something there because they're strange and they don't teach you the rules. And so you don't know what the game can and can't do. And that makes them exciting in a way that like the very professional, very slick games can't deliver. Because they do teach you the rules. They're very carefully managed and this is a good game, but it's not weird. And so I like those weird games that can surprise you. And sometimes they're not meant to surprise you, but they still surprise you. And that's cool. I like that sort of experiment, basically.
I like non-intentional. It kind of reminds me similar, but not necessarily the case. Like, so it's so bad, it's good kind of like situation with films. I know that's not quite what you're saying, but that's kind of what it reminds me of. Like,
there's a vampire hunting game. I can't remember what it's called. I'll find it in a second. And they made it in like 3 months because they needed some money. And it was like a tiny team. And it is so bad, it's good. It's a terrible, terrible game. Demon Summoner, there you go. And it's like the second level is a stealth level, and it's maybe half an hour long. And if ever you get seen, it plays an unskippable cutscene, and then it loads the main menu and dumps you at it. That's it, tough. And it makes you load the start of the level and start the whole thing again. And you're like, oh my God, this is insane. But it's so terrible, the game. It's brilliant. And you punch Satan at the end, and you're like, what am I playing? This is incredible.
I have to look that one up.
But that makes you pay attention, that game, though. Yeah, you definitely don't want to die in that one.
No, exactly, yeah. And so I love those sort of things that are just like, hang on, what just happened? That sort of game, you know.
That's brilliant. You cover a lot of horror-infused FPSs, Fear, Condemned, definitely a lot of that in the kind of like late 2000s. Once again, kind of taking a lot of that kind of like Call of Duty-esque stuff, but then bringing horror into it. Definitely a genre I'm into. When do you think these genre blending games really start to take hold? Because of now, that's like such a staple of gaming.
Yeah, it's true, actually. It's a good question of like, where are the early ones? Because I mean, first-person shooters have always had that kind of element of, because your field of view is so narrow, and when one of the things like the thing in Doom where the monsters make the noise even though you can't see them, and that adds that tension. But you get the system shocks, you get cryostasis, which is this game where you freeze to death and you have to find heat, and the Penumbra guys, which was, the prequels to Amnesias and stuff like this. They really start playing with that idea of you're very limited in what you can see. But yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure what I hadn't really thought about that. What is the kind of the first sort of horror specific sort of first person shooter? Interesting. I'm going to have to think of
one for the listeners.
Yeah, interesting.
Just want to let us know.
Yeah, one for the comments section.
Cool.
I mean, there's a lot of around that time. You mentioned like genre blending there, horror coming into FPS games as well. One thing that definitely was quite prevalent in the 2000s was story becoming a lot more important, having deeper stories. Kind of started with Half-Life, I suppose, but then by the time we got to the late 2000s, BioShock came along, and I love the BioShock games, and they told a much deeper story as well. I mean, do you think that kind of shifted player expectations around what an FPS game should be? Because, I mean, before that, I mean, a lot of the games are just kind of mindless shooters, but bringing deep stories like BioShock had into the game, did that change players' expectations, do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, so the only person who's interviewed in both books is Ken Levine, because I interviewed him for the first book and we talked for literally hours, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so there was enough left for a second interview in the second book. And he really talked about, they were specifically saying with BioShock, let's treat players like adults. Like, let's not just say, shoot this monster in the face. Let's actually assume you're going to follow this story. And obviously that succeeded. But it's always been a challenge though. Like, they had in Ultima Underworld, right from the start, you could talk to people, but it was very basic. And so when they did System Shock, they were like, these conversations are not good. We can't work out how to do them better, so we're going to kill everyone. And you never meet a living person because we can't work out how to talk to them. And so they've always struggled with that kind of mechanical side of, well, why can't I just say, hey, you, let's run away, let's screw this, let's go. And you just can't, you're not allowed, sort of thing. But yeah, Half-Life tried to establish a sense of place. Although I do argue that I think started the kind of the Call of Duty scripted thing. That wheel started turning with Half-Life because it very much is a player-centric game compared to, say, Quake, which is just a world and you explore it. And then story stuff like Deus Ex, of course, which had enormous sort of story to it. And then there's a whole bunch of, there's some Might and Magic stuff in there. And then things like Republic Commando came in and suddenly they were trying to do something like, you can take the difference between Dark Forces and Republic Commando. It's not a story-based game, but it has a lot more character, has a lot more kind of story, basically. Yeah. It was another way of differentiating yourself, I think.
And do you think there was any, obviously, like the PSP and the DS, were bigger around then. Do you think there was any standout handheld FPSs during the era? A lot of people have got a lot of nostalgia for the PSP now. I think it was a very underrated, machine for the time. Or do you think first-person shooters are still suited for more powerful hardware?
Yeah, I mean, we do cover various handheld games. And the thing that's always the question with them is this a good game? Or is it a good game because it's on handheld and I've got no games?
That's a really good question. Yeah.
But yeah, there are good games that are genuinely good. Like, there's a game called Moon on the GBA, which is like a sci-fi shooter, and it's got a really interesting little story, and it's got little drones you control and stuff like that. It's cool. And there's one called Ice 9, which was supposed to be based on a film, but that film was terrible, so they delayed the game and then took the license off it. And it's like a counter-terrorism shooter, but it has stuff like you can shoot lights out, or there's civilians, and if you shoot them, you fail, or you have to fire warning shots. And they really pushed things. So the Game Boy, the GBA, actually had some good FPSs. There aren't that many on the PSP. The Ghost in the Shell one is quite cool. You have a little tank thing that you can order around, and it has a terrible story, like properly terrible. But the game is good. And there was a few, but it's difficult because of the lack of, you didn't have two sticks, and they rapidly established that as a kind of a control scheme. And then, of course, there were Metroid games suddenly appearing on the DS and stuff like this. But yeah, there are some nice games. Yeah, it's cool.
It's interesting because obviously first-person shooters were a genre that really pushed technology forward. I remember, it felt like every 6 months in the late 90s, all my friends that were PC gamers would be buying new graphics cards to play the latest FPS game. But recently there seems to have been, we've been covering these on the podcast quite a lot over the last couple of years, the nickname boomer shooters, which are kind of retro-style shooters, stuff like Head-On and Ion Fury was a big one as well. I mean, what do you think, personally? I mean, obviously, it kind of goes a bit beyond the books. It's more of a, maybe for Volume 3 if you do that. But this kind of revival in retro-style shooters, why do you think that's become popular recently on the indie scene?
The thing that's interesting about them is, at what point will they become kind of untenable, in that So for people of our age, that's what a retro shooter looks like. It looks like Quake and all these sort of things, or even further back, it looks like Wolfenstein, like that Wizardum just got released like this week, and that looks like Wolfenstein or Heretic and stuff like this. So that's what a first person shooter looks like. But of course, as you go on, retro games for some players are going to be Call of Duty 4 and Half-Life 2 and stuff. And so when they say, well, I want to make a retro shooter, that's what they're going to look back at. And then you get to a point you go, well, can you make one of those games as a retro, like as a fan? They needed a huge team at the time. You can, as an individual or a small team, remake one of these old Quake Doom games. Can you make a Half-Life 2 or Call of Duty 4? I don't know if you can. So I'm curious to see what happens as the market kind of gets older and what becomes retro keeps growing and growing. But until that happens, I think they're amazing. And I would love to do a third book. We're not actually rolling straight into it because we're worried that, like, let's say it went up to, say, 2020. That's actually not very long ago. That's not retro. Yeah. So you need some time. You need to be able to look back and, so whether or not we do a third book, I don't know. It depends how well the second one does. But
even focusing that as well, because the genre became so splintered in the 2010s, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, I haven't really sort of thought about it or planned it, but I could imagine you would have to be very selective about the games in a third one because there's just so many of them. You couldn't possibly do it. But yeah, I'd love to do it at some point. If people buy the second one and a few years pass and they become kind of retro, as it were, then it'll be amazing to kind of wrap up the genre. Yeah.
It's already happening scarily fast, though, isn't it? So, but the new book, though, incredible. As you mentioned, I really hope this does well for you and Bitmap Books. I'm sure it will. Like all of their books, looks absolutely incredible, thoroughly researched as well. So if you're a fan of the first-person shooter, Hurt Me Plenty: The Ultimate Guide to First-Person Shooters, detailing the years 2003 to 2010, available this month, 21st of May. You can get notified right now to get your copy at bitmapbooks.com. Stuart, best of luck with it, and thank you so much for coming on and being our guest this week. It's been great to talk to you. Yeah, it's lovely. It's nice just to kind of talk about these things. You kind of get head down, and so being able to look up and go, oh yeah, that's cool. So thanks a lot for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thanks.